All right, so starting over back at turn one, again, all these white arrows that you're going to see are going to be pointing to corner worker stations throughout so that you can get an idea of what you're looking for. Not all of them are stations that are frequently manned, but just so you have an idea. As you're coming down into turn one, typically there's a couple brake markers over along the grass here. And then certainly by the end of the pit wall on the left and the end of the grass, you're going to be on the brakes. And then just as you move forward, you're starting to look ahead for the second little patch of grass, looking for your apex. And you can see there's a little bit of a fall off in the elevation change here, so you can't quite see into the corner yet, but your eyes up. And then once you get up here close to this patch of grass, you have a good visual and you can see down into the apex. You're looking for the turn in halfway along the grassy section on the left side. Just as the track kind of kinks back in, it'll come to you and you're starting to turn in the car. The car will be dancing around a little bit here because you're a little bit downhill, but the idea is to keep up lots of entry speed because as soon as you get to the apex, the track will kind of come to you. You get a nice big compression and a lot of grip. So here again, here's a good indicator of the apex, nice grippy asphalt at the apex, and you're starting to get the compression from the low spot. The apex curving here isn't always very helpful. In some higher, softer cars, it can be a little bit useful, but in most cases, you're probably going to be just right up next to it and not quite all the way down the line. As we start to move forward towards the track out, your eyes up, looking ahead. The edge of this track out here gets a little bit interesting because in a lot of places, a lot of events, a lot of races, there's going to be a lot of build up and the dirty edge of the track here. Almost no one's going to track out all the way to the exit curving, but within 2 to 3 feet in the lower powered Miatas and E30s and that sort of thing, higher powered GT cars, really high horsepower, high weight cars, you have to keep it a little bit closer to the mid track, about 2/3 left, so that you can keep the car a little bit more straight as you transition from the exit of 1 into 2, which we'll review here in a second. So here we are in a Miata, again, just a little bit off the edge of the road, but if you were in a higher power car, you might be a little bit more towards the middle of the road. You're looking ahead, you see these 2 pine trees, which as we get over the hill, you're going to find they're right by the turn 3 corner worker station on driver's right. But as you're coming up over the hill, you can use them as a bit of a reference point. I'm not going to tell you to aim right at them necessarily because, again, if you're in a higher power car, you're going to take it more to the right and then try to straighten out the brake zone into 2 a little bit more. But here as we come up the hill, this is just a visual for car placement for a Miata, just a couple feet off the edge of the road maybe, whereas the car that we're riding with would be a little bit more similar to where a high power car might be. And just as you start to track out here, you're going to start to see the end of the pit out line from the pro pit side, the track right pits. There's a dash line that comes out. This is, again, just a reference point for a TA2 car coming up a little bit higher power, a little bit more center of the track. And just over the right, you can kind of see under the name on the windshield, there's a yellow line coming up. And that kind of goes from a sub line to a dash line, again, just a reference point as you come up. Then as we're into turn 2, we get these white dashed lines that are perpendicular to the direction of travel. This one that is second from left that you see with the arrow reference point, that's a good one that you kind of want to be on top of. It depends, again, how far over from track right you're coming. In a high power car, you might be right side tires kind of middle of the road here as you cross these. And so left side tires on that hash mark. If you're in a lower power car, you might have kind of all 4 at the corners of this line. But it's a good reference point for getting a feel for where you're coming up over the hill. And just about at this point, you should start to see the turn 2 curving becoming visible on the left side. So you're just eyes up over there, looking for that turn 2 curve, using in your peripheral this dash line as a reference point. And again, just taking note of the corner worker stations that are over on the right side. As we come up, we're just here at the beginning of the turn 2 curve. You don't want to be real tight to it at the beginning, but you do want to start to look for being tight to it kind of through the middle and certainly towards the end of it. You want to make sure you're staying full track left and getting ready for the turn of 3. You'll notice the track is just starting to crest at the end of the curve, And so we're starting to go a little bit downhill into turn 3. Very light braking here in most cars. I mean, the faster cars obviously are going to be trying to shed a little bit more speed, but turn 3 is a very fast corner. Even though it looks real tight as you're coming up to it, it's in a lot of cars, you know, a top of 3rd gear, maybe even kind of lugging 4th gear corner. So it's very quick. We'll talk about how much to use the curbing at the apex, but certainly this is a place where you want to kind of minimize how much braking you're going through. You're trying to maintain a lot of speed and keep the car kind of flowing through this section. Here's another good look, nice and tight on the end of the curb at turn 2, which is your turn in for 3. We're starting the crest, we're turning in over the hill, and now we're aiming at the curb. And we're going to go over this a good bit here because people will talk about how much to jump this curve or not. And again, it's very different for different cars. But this green and white curving, the first 2 feet or so, are pretty usable in just about anything. And then once you start getting more of that, it's obviously getting more aggressive. And so where we've got the arrow pointing to the raised curve, which here is in kind of a raw concrete form, this is a raised even higher. It goes another 3 inches or so higher. And if you're getting to this, it's going to make the car hop a lot more. And also, if you note the trajectory, your left side tires are barely going to be on the track at this point. So you're kind of using the ramp of the curb to more or less jump the right side of the car, and you're kind of going to be unweighted going over the grassy section back onto the track. But the real problem with being aggressive here is the landing. And so once you are coming back to the track, probably in most cars, you're going to be trying to bottom the left side. You'll see a lot of scrapes in the pavement, and it can be pretty rough and aggressive on the car. So certainly depending on how well the car takes to curbing, you want to be careful with how much you jump it. In most DE situations, I wouldn't advise more than just the green and white portion of the curb. And certainly anything that's more sensitive to downforce or underbody arrow is going to be something where you want to stay away from the raised curb more. But as we said, you're trying to maintain speed through this section. Focus on trying to carry a higher gear if it's kind of borderline. Usually people, even if, say for instance, 4th gear doesn't give you the drive out of the corner, if you can focus more on lighter braking, maintaining speed, a lot of times you're going to be faster through this sector by considering, a higher gear and trying to focus on a higher rolling speed rather than slow the car down and accelerate out, because you want a nice flow through this whole section here. We kind of categorize this as, fairly medium risk, medium reward. It's something where, you certainly have runoff to the left. There's a motorcycle chicane over there if you need to go straight from your braking zone. The place where people get in a problem area here is over to the right. If you jump the curb and get oversteer, the worst case is, hooking it over to the right into those tire barrels. The best thing you can do is go off to the left. It can be bumpy, but you'll be better served that way. Here we are just showing car placement. This is what you would typically see, especially DE stuff. You don't want to use too much of the raised curb. You can get away with this in just about any street car, pretty much any race car. Shouldn't land too hard, following the curbing. But here's just for reference a TA2 car. You can see kind of just to the left of the name on the windshield, you're seeing the raised curbing that's got a little bit more rubber on it. And so the right side tires are going to go up, use that extra bit of ramp curbing and kind of jump the dirt section that's following. Left side tires are going to be just barely on the green and white curb, kind of the edge of the track where that yellow line is. And so you have to be prepared a little bit as the car hits this jump to kind of be light on the wheel and be able to free up the steering some so that you don't land with the wheels, pinched real tight to the right, and that can cause an oversteer. But just nice and free on the wheel, let it kind of straighten as the car feels comfortable doing in the air, and that way once you land, you can kind of go back to what you're doing as far as steering angle.
And one thing I want to add here, Mike, is that when you go in, a lot of people try to make up speed by going up and charging up to 2 and braking late for 3, and that can be a big mistake. Carrying too much speed in, the car may not turn, or if you jump off the brakes and you turn in, then you get this big release and you can start going sideways, and then you have the runoff area. So once you kind of have where the car is on the edge and feel okay, then you're probably pretty good for that corner. If you start overcharging, it's going to cost you on the exit.
All right. And so as we go over the apex point, we're looking to track out all the way over to the left side. So our eyes are going to be looking over towards the turn 4 curbing. You don't want to pinch the wheel and try to keep it center of track here. Some guys will try to keep it a little bit more center of track so that they can kind of late apex turn 4, but you end up losing so much on turn 3 that you lose over the sector. So it's better to go ahead and track it out towards the curve of 4 and then just kind of run the inside line all the way around 4, and then you'll release the wheel just towards the end of the curving on 4. But again, we're eyes up, as far around the curving at turn 4 as we can, keeping it nice and tight. And then just as we get right before the end of the curve, you're starting to release the wheel a little bit. The car is probably just going to start to naturally track out away from the curve just from adding power. As your speed builds, obviously the radius of the corner is going to get a bit wider. And so you're looking ahead, kind of where the track starts to vanish down the hill. Again, there's a corner worker over on the right. And at this point, you don't want to let out more than mid-track. So here we are, just starting to crest down the hill into the downhill S's, and you don't want to get over too far track right because then you won't be able to set up on the left. Once you get back to the midpoint, you're just holding the steering input, letting it come back to the left, and then at the beginning of this curve, nice smooth transition of the wheel to the right. There should be no straight section. It should be one nice motion left to right. And most cars, you're going to breathe the throttle a little bit. Some very heavy, fast cars, I've dragged the brake just for a brief moment, but ideally, you don't want to do any braking, just a light little lift. Some cars are flat. We can't tell you, obviously, exactly how it's going to react, but one big thing here is to try to minimize that pause while you're waiting for what's going to come, what you can see over the hill. So with more and more muscle memory, you kind of get an idea of how the car is going to react, and you get a better idea of what to expect as you go over the hill, so you can kind of minimize the pause at the top of the hill. But one thing I see a lot of guys do is they wait until they can see the apex to turn, and by that point they're basically at the end of this apex curving, or this turn-in curving on the left here. It's a lot better to be closer to the beginning of the curve and use slower hands. If you go to the end of the curve, then you have to turn really quick, and that's going to unsettle the car a bit more. The earlier you can do it, the lighter on the steering you can be, the earlier you can turn it in, and it's a much smoother transition. And so as we get down the hill a little bit here, you're able to see the apex curving a little bit. You want to be nice and tight to the curve, but not on top of it. Same here, just showing car placement. Nice and tight right on the yellow line. This is an area that is fairly high risk. You can see there's concrete walls on each end, each side, and even more so in the rain. So it's an area that, you want to leave a little bit on the table for those that are just figuring it out, getting used to it. But it's definitely a place where you can make up a good bit of time once you get a feel for where the car is going to react at the top of the hill with your turn in and where you're going to end up at this apex. As you get through to the apex on the left, it's really critical to make sure that you're holding left past the end of the curve. So right there, after the yellow line ends, you should still be holding tight left to the white. Some guys will use this curve on the left, which we're going to show in just a minute here. So coming down the hill, we've stayed on the power a little bit longer in the TA2 car because we've got a good bit of ground clearance, nice and soft. We can plan on using that curve, so we're basically making the right-hander that goes down the hill a longer radius corner and just tracking out to the left-hand curve. Now, when you do that, you have to plan for coming off the curve right at the end of it, and you have to be very inch perfect because you want to, again, keep the car left as you come off of this curving. So you're basically kind of going just over the edge of the grass there on that little point and keeping a little bit of left input just to keep the car more set up for turn 5 and the brake zone. Now we're moving pretty steeply uphill. If you've ever walked RoadAtlanta, you'd probably be amazed how steep this is all the way through and to the exit of turn 5. It doesn't necessarily feel like it as much while you're in the moment, while you're in the car, but this is a very steep brake zone, so you can really take advantage of how quickly this car is going to slow down. But on the same token, you have a very important straightaway coming up, one of the longer ones, and you've got a very steep uphill all the way through it. So it's more important to be off the brakes early and back into the power early. So I don't really focus on braking as late as I dare, or, trying to get anything done on that regard, by making up time on the entry. It's much more important that you focus on getting the car slowed down adequately, but off the brakes as early as possible, and then back to the gas as early as possible as well. We're trying to be parallel to this curb on the right while it's kind of straight. And then just as we get to the end and the curb on the right is kind of turning away towards that short course, that's where we want to kind of start our transition to the left. Also, if you'll notice kind of where the rubber goes from very black to kind of gray, that's where there's kind of a little bit of an elevation change. It's very subtle. I call it more of a undulation. It's just where there's like a tiny little crest in the pavement. And so what we're trying to accomplish here is to get a good bit of rotation done really early so that the car is already pointed towards the apex before you get there and you're back to power really early. So just as the curb goes away to the right, we're starting with a good bit of steering input, get the car rotated very early. And that way, once you're to this point, the car's already basically made the turn and you're starting to unwind the wheel and track it out. We'll talk about this exit curve here quite a bit because there's a lot of different ways to take it. Here's just a little bit of to show you the car placement. Again, nice and tight on the yellow line, right up to the curb, but not really on top of it. I've seen some cases where you can get on top of the curb, but it's not a huge improvement and it can really unsettle the car. Here we are talking about the track out curving. So right now where this car is placed is kind of, a good DE sort of situation where you would have 2 tires on the curb, 2 tires on the track. And then as we come up over the hill, you'll end up kind of straddling the end of the curb in a V. But a lot of E30s, Miatas, jump cars make it, because you're lower power and softer suspensions, it's possible to track out all the way, 4 tires on the curb, and right out to this little corner that's the intersection of the curbing and the short track where this gravel comes to a V. And so you're basically just clipping that, with as much as you dare. And it's not over at this point because that short track is very bumpy as well. So you're going to continue to bounce off the curb over the short track, and then you have to keep some left-hand steering input in it to make sure you get back onto the track before the grass begins again. This is just kind of showing, again, you could even be 2 to 3 feet more to the right than this car is in this situation. And back to kind of the D line, you're going to make sure you straddle this V at the end if you're staying, 2 tires on the track. There are even some very high horsepower cars, stock cars, Trans Am cars, that sort of thing, where we won't even touch the curb. We'll be right up on the yellow line, right next to the curb. But because it gets so bumpy and the painted surface hurts the forward traction so much, there's some cases where it pays to tighten the radius of the corner but get the power down better. So some, your really high horsepower GTRs, Corvettes, whatever, you may find that to be helpful as well. And now down the straightaway into turn 6. This is, we've gone down a couple little undulations in the straightaway, but now we're getting to the important part. And you can see that at this little dotted line marker going across the track, this is the low point, and from here on, you're going uphill through turn 6 and really all the way to the entry of turn 7. So you have a lot of grip in this brake zone. You can really compress the brakes and use them very hard compared to most of the other corners on the track where you're downhill or just doing a very short brake zone. But you can get a lot of braking done here, and then at the next dash line, which is pretty much covered in rubber, is where you'll begin your turn in. This is the 3rd dash line, which we're looking at, and it's just a reference point so that this, second one from left is what you'll be running over. You're looking ahead into the corner, and you'll notice that there's a lot of positive camber to this corner. So you want to take advantage of that. You can carry in lots and lots of entry speed. You'll notice there's also a tire wall, so there's a little bit to keep yourself in check as far as the brake zone, but you can learn your way into it several times by carrying more and more speed to the point where I can't quite keep the apex, but you don't have to force yourself so deep that you're off the track or endangering the car. But certainly there's a lot more grip here in the mid corner than most people will take advantage of, and in the brake zone. So you can compress the brakes quite a lot, turn in pretty early compared to your typical school line. But you'll also be carrying the brakes into the corner so that as the camber gains into the corner, and you gain lateral grip, you're kind of releasing the brake, once you get very far into it. Also here, the apex is fairly late in the corner, and you do not want to use this curve either, especially because of the steep camber. If you get up on that curve, then you lose a little bit of that advantage that you have in that grip level. So nice and tight to the curb, and because we still have an uphill on the exit, you can be pretty hard on the power, but you do want to make sure that as you gain speed through here, it can change your entry speed into turn 7 substantially. I've seen guys gain 10 miles an hour or more on the exit here in a weekend. And so it's really important to be, to fix your timing a little bit and be mindful of the fact that as soon as you come through here, when you're really hauling the mail, that turn 7 brake zone is going to come up really early. And as we'll get to, it's more important to focus on the exit there. So as you come through turn 6, eyes are up, you're starting to pick up that track out curving. And just as soon as you get out to the track out, basically, you're going to be on the brakes, setting up for turn 7. This is just a little bit of a reference point, backing up a little to the way in. As you see that yellow line kind of goes from straight to adding a little bit more angle to it as the radius gets a little bit tighter there. That's about where you're picking up the inside curving or intersecting that yellow line. So that's just a visual reference point for you to kind of aim for as you're getting into the corner. Again, just showing you car placement, nice and tight to the curb, but not on top of it. Looking ahead, we're starting to add power a lot. And you can kind of see from this angle that you have pretty good camber until that track out, and then it flattens out a little bit. You get a little bit of an undulation. Here we are on the brakes into turn 7, still slightly uphill. And you can also kind of see just as the curve ends, the white line on the edge of the track kind of falls a little bit, and it's very subtle to see, and it's best done on a track walk, but you'll feel it in the car for sure. And so as you get to the turn in here, much like turn 5, you want to take advantage of that little moment where the car gets a little bit light to get a lot of rotation done. And so what you're doing is, as you're releasing the brake, as you're turning in, getting a little bit of steering input there, the front end starts to turn, and then just as you crest that little undulation or elevation change, the rear will follow. But because the rear is now light, it'll come around really quick. And so you're trying to take advantage of that elevation change and that rotation to get the car really turned on the way in. And that way you can pick up the throttle really early on the way out. Here it is again, a little bit closer. You can kind of see again, just that the yellow and white line, how the angle of them changes just a little bit right at the end of the curve. You can also see kind of the change in the rubber a little bit. And just as these rubber marks are arcing into the corner, kind of midway of that green stripe is where that high point is. And so just after that is where the rear will start to rotate, and you can get the car turned in towards the apex. This is, again, a place that's really critical because it obviously is the slowest corner of the track and the longest straightaway. So we're really focused on exit speed here. And it's very important to be very precise, very clean on the way in, so that you can get everything, focused on good exit speed. Here we are looking at the apex. I've seen, a few people use the curve here, but in general, I would say it's best practice not to be on the curve. It kind of unsettles the car and can create power down issues. Some front drive guys will take advantage of it because it doesn't hurt them as bad. Or if you have any car that's understeering really bad, you can kind of use that to help the car turn. But I would say in most cases, a car that is fairly neutral, especially rear drive, you want to be just tight to the curb, but not really on top of it. And you also start to see that we're flattening out, starting to go downhill a little bit, and maybe ever so slightly off camber right at the exit. But because of that, again, it's really important to be nice and tidy on the power and on the way out. Now that we know the car's pointed in, it's ready to clip the curb, we want to focus ahead and start getting our eyes up towards that track out curb. Again, looking ahead. And once you get there, you can certainly use the curving, but make sure you're getting off of it by the end, because there's typically some pretty big drop-offs and bumps out there in the dirt. This is just showing you a little bit of car placement. Again, you can use basically everything that you can get to and still get off of the curb in time. Yeah, right at the end of it. And then as we come up on the back straightaway through turn 8, coming up over the left-hander, you're going to hold left all the way to this first bridge just to run the shortest distance. Checking your mirrors as you're coming up the hill so you know what's coming before you get down it. Most of the time, even in racing, you want to make sure you're facilitating out-of-class passes pretty well here. Slower cars will typically hold left until they know there's ample room to get by. Same in DEs, obviously. Different groups will have different rules, but you want to make sure you're facilitating passes here and kind of choosing your lane wisely. If you're all by yourself, you just draw a short line all the way to the right side for turn 9, run a nice short distance. Unless you're in a really high horsepower, really heavy car, in which case you might hold left a little longer and actually kind of apex turn 9. But in most cases, that's not necessary. We just pointed out here the corner worker station on the back straight by turn 9 is the black flag station. And then as you start rounding turn 9, you're looking down the hill towards 10A and B. Got several different corner worker stations. Take a minute, look ahead, survey all the situation. You get a nice big view here so you can see if there's a car out in the gravel, if there's a flag way up there under the bridge at 11. So it's good to start looking ahead. Also, just as you start rounding this, if you're in a really fast, high horsepower, heavy car, you want to notice that there's a big dip in the road right about where this car is sitting now. If we back up, as you come around here, you want to kind of let the car out just a little bit towards the mid-track left, 1 lane over at least towards the left to avoid that bump a little bit. And beyond or any 30, it's such a long bump, it doesn't really matter. But anything, traveling 160 or more, certainly it can become an issue. So you'll just start your brake zone a little bit left and then start easing it back over to the right during the brake zone so that you're set up fully track right by the time you're getting down towards your turn in. Again, taking a quick little look at all your corner worker stations, picking your brake point. And this is, pretty steeply downhill brake zone on the way in, and then it flattens out as you get down towards the curving on the right. So you want to make sure that you don't come in here too hot, because it's pretty tough to get the car slowed down sometimes if you're starting way up the hill. Here we are as we're getting closer. Just past the midway, kind of a couple stripes before the end. You see us on the 3rd white stripe is about where you want to start your turn in. And we're looking for nice, smooth, slow hands turning in here, because you want to kind of add weight to the outside of the car in a nice, smooth fashion. If you go in too deep towards the end of the curb on the right, then you have to turn very quickly, and that's going to make the car harder to accept those lateral forces. So by starting a little bit earlier but with slower hands, you can load the car more progressively but still reach the apex of 10A on time, without being too early, whereas you would be too early if you started at this point and really just yanked the wheel in. So we're starting fairly early, adding slow hands, turning it in, looking ahead towards that turn 10A. And then as you start to reach the apex curving, we're aiming to use pretty much all of it in any car. It's pretty rare that there's a car that can't take this curb. Some of the heavier street cars with lots of suspension travel or that sort of thing, they can feel a little bit more. But because we're so weighted on the right, and these curbs don't really, gain height any, they're basically flat just with ramps downward to create the rumble. In most cases, because the inside tires are so unweighted, it's not too much of an issue. If you run over them in your car and it just feels like, wow, that really felt like I was abusing it, then you can use half the curb or whatever, and it'll be a little bit more gentle. Or certainly if you're in a long endurance race and you feel like maybe the car can't take that for 10, 12 hours, whatever the case is, then you can use a little bit less of it. But same general rules apply. All you would be doing is moving the apex about a foot, but the idea here is to apex kind of in the middle of the curving, but to hold left input past that so that you remain left of center on the way out. You can see that we're nice and flat at this apex, but then it starts to climb again through 10B. And so we want to focus on a good exit from 10B where we'll have good grip, good power down, and also, of course, leading onto a fast section in turn 12 and the front straightaway. So we want to get a good exit out of here. You might sacrifice a little bit of 10A in order to get that good drive. Here it's just showing we're holding a little bit of left input past the apex and just showing you car placement. But again, we want to be left of center. You can see that center line of just off the right fender on this frame. And you're looking ahead towards the apex, which is just past the midpoint of the arc. And you're going to, if you're using the curb, which in most cases, is just like 10A, it's not too big of a deal. You can use the apex. You're basically going to come off of the curb right at the end of it. And so now we're adding in input, clipping the curb, and again, just where that yellow line ends and the white line begins again, and the grass starts, that's where you're going to be coming off of it with the right side tires. Most cars at this transition point, you're going to have to hesitate on the throttle a little bit, not even really lift, but just crack the throttle up a little bit. If it's a Miata or an E30 or whatever, you might get flat, but it's kind of rare. Most cars, you're going to be cracking the throttle a little bit here. You definitely don't want to brake, and it shouldn't be a deceleration. It should just be kind of flatlining the acceleration. So if you're somebody that's going back and looking at your data through here, and you notice that you carry pretty good speed through 10A, but then there's a big dip in the velocity between 10A and B, probably you're not sacrificing enough in 10A, and so you have to decel too much for 10B. So we want to kind of maintain a little bit of acceleration all the way through. Again, you can just flatline it a little bit. If you want, hesitate just a bit as we start to transition, and then certainly from this point at the apex of 10B, you want to be adding power, building speed all the way out. And we're looking ahead towards that track out curving. This is not a very friendly curve, so we're looking at just the edge of it, just barely touch it. Again, minimal use of the exit curb, maybe half a tire on it or something, but as soon as you get a whole tire on that, it's just going to want to drag the car out to the left. There's such a bumpy curb that you almost lose steering input, and so the car just kind of goes straight or even left. But as we track out to this point, we're starting to look ahead. We're using a reference on the bridge here. They've got these 3 dotted squares of color. And most of the time I would tell people look at the red or white, kind of right in between there. If you go to the yellow on the left side, you're going to end up pretty far over left coming over the hill, and you're going to have to kind of pinch it to keep it on track. If you're over a little bit more right, towards the red and white, then that'll give you a little bit straighter run over the hill at 11 and set up at 12. Just here right before the bridge, you're starting to see the dotted line for the Pro Pits blend line. That's a good reference point just to, as you're coming over the hill, you can kind of stop looking at those dotted lines on the bridge because obviously they're going to disappear and they're kind of out of the way. If you're looking down the track more, you'll see this blend line coming to you. You want to cross it and end up at least 2 tires inside of this dotted line at this curve here. You can see the apex just over the right, which there's usually a big hole there, so you want to be very careful if you're all the way over right. In a lot of cars, especially high horsepower cars, I will be more to the right, all 4 tires inside of that dotted yellow line. That mostly is to help straighten up the car going over this hill where it gets light a little bit. There are a few bumps, and so you can get some big wheel spin in fast cars. It's not as big of a deal if you're in a Miata or E30 or something that's putting power down fine. You can let the car go ahead and track out a little bit more to the left and help you set up for 12. Again, this is just showing a TA car getting a little bit closer to the right side, but again, careful of the hole there on the right. And then as we crest the hill, we're coming down. We're looking eyes up towards the end of this curving on the left, and this is a very important corner. Obviously, it's pretty high risk, but there can be pretty good reward for it as well. Quick glance at the corner markers or the corner marshals before you get down into the busy part. Make sure you know what's at the flag stand, just in case there's a yellow or something. You don't want to come around at 100 plus out of control and trying to avoid a wrecked car. But looking at that turn-in mark, And then you'll notice here we're a little bit off camber. We're still going downhill. And you want to use reference points, kind of the car length or two past the end of the curb here on the left, where the grass is, the edge of the track is kind of come to you a little bit. And also that one far down there in the middle of the track, there's a little concrete patch, which we'll show you in a bit. But here, as you get to the end of the curbing, you're starting with slow hands turning in. And again, because the edge of the road is turning right as you're turning right, it's going to kind of follow you. So you're right on the edge of the track here. You're starting to turn, and even though the car is responding a little bit, it's still going downhill and it's off camber, so it doesn't respond very quickly. But the edge of the track is also going to come to you. So you'll kind of touch the edge of the track again, right where that first arrow is. And then that's also about the point where the track is starting to flatten out. And so once it flattens out there, and then you kind of get back to no camber, no downhill, the car is going to respond a lot better, and it's going to start into the corner a little bit. And that's where that second reference point will come in a little bit more important. So this is the patch. It's kind of halfway from your turn in to your apex. And because this corner is so long, you can't really see the apex, it's good to have something kind of midway to make sure you're right on track. If you are left side tires outside of this, you're maybe a little bit late. If you're right on the edge of the patch, it's probably not too bad. But if you're straddling it, you're probably a little bit late. If your left side tires are inside of this patch, driver's right of this patch, you're way early. So it's important as you get down here that you're keeping left side tires on this patch or just towards the edge of it, left edge of it. And that way you're not ending up too early or too late once you get down to the apex. If you come down here straddling this, especially on a race weekend or something where people are putting out rubber marbles, you're going to end up in those marbles once you get to that apex, and before that even. So it's very important at this point that you have a good idea of how the rest of the corner is going to play out. And if you know that you turned in at the right spot, your left side tires are running over this patch, and you're looking ahead towards the apex curving, then you're pretty much done. In most cars, that's the hard part. And then once we move forward a little bit, you're clipping the curb, apex right towards the end of it. Again, not on top of the curb, just touching it a little bit. Another little glance of the corner worker, which is straight in front of you at the start-finish stand. And at this point, you want to start releasing the steering input. You want to let the car track all the way out. The track out is right under that start-finish stand at the finish line. And you want to make sure the car lets it all the way out there. A lot of guys, especially in an EV situation, because you can't see this track out yet, it's so far away, they don't get in the habit of opening the wheel, and that's really important. Even if you are given a pause at the entry and you're not all the way up to speed through here, not on the limit all the way through, it's important to get the mental habit of letting the car track all the way out and using the full width of the road. And on that, just at the beginning here, a lot of guys will find that they're kind of high in the revs coming down the hill. The car is accelerated really quick. And so they're going through here in maybe fourth gear, and there's a lot of change to the car anytime that you lift off the throttle at all. So I frequently advise guys to go ahead and upshift, short shift the car a little bit if needed so that it's smoother going through. Usually in a lot of cars that'll be fifth gear, and that way you can add power nice and smooth and be able to take it all the way through from the apex and let it track out. Again, looking ahead, showing car placement, nice and tight with the right side tires on the edge of the curbing, and then using all the full width of the track out. A lot of guys don't want to use the track out curve. That's fine. It can be very slick, and certainly the backside of it can get pretty rutted. So there can be a hole there, and you certainly don't want to find yourself grinding over the top of the curb and getting sideways and fishtailing down the straightaway. You can see, obviously, you're in a concrete canyon here. There's nowhere to run, really. So you don't want to find yourself in trouble here. It's possible to get out of it, but there's a lot of guys, and you can see the skid marks off to the right. A lot of guys that have gotten themselves in trouble here. So if you're tracking out using the curb, make sure you're nice and straight with the steering wheel, getting it back onto the asphalt as soon as you can, as smoothly as you can is the big thing. If you find yourself going two wheels over into the dirt, just ride it out. Don't try to pinch it back on. Go ahead and get straight, try to just ride it through the grass with 2 wheels and then ease it back on. It's not too big of a deal. And here's just a couple of quick little kind of side notes about pit in and pit out. These are pit out. Obviously, if you're pitted over on the outside paddock, the support paddock area, you want to make sure that you stay full left. That's the more important one. You don't want to cut down into that dark area of pavement. And then if you're on the pro pit side, make sure you stay inside that blend line, because people will be coming up there trying to get back towards driver's right to set up for 2 a little bit. And then also pit in over by the bridge at turn 11. Pretty self-explanatory here, but the pro pit side is it's a little bit of a tight turn coming over the hill there. You're a little nice and light, so you don't want to pinch it too bad, but keep it right. And then also on the left side, you basically just go straight all the way down in.